So this one's for the new phonology students. One of the biggest challenges, the biggest jump in the learning curve for new phonology students is this idea that sounds exist on two levels. And you start to hear talk about phonemes and allophones, or phones. And you really have to imagine these two separate parallel levels, two different ways of looking at what language sounds are. And telling those levels apart is one of the biggest things to get used to. So let's look into this. See, we'll start with, like, you may get a lot of attention, a lot of talk about the different way to record these sounds. The different, they call brackets. So you have the slashes and you have the square brackets. So you have the slashes representing phonemes, right? And then the square brackets representing phones or allophones. And you really see a lot, like, there's a lot of attention put, a lot of emphasis put in phonology courses on using the right brackets, because, you know, and maybe sometimes they push that a little bit too hard. They really focus on, you know, you lose a lot of marks if you put the wrong brackets. But the point is to look at these as two separate things. So the difference really is what is actually coming out of your mouth or going into your ear. This is on the physical level. And then there is how we think about sounds, how we imagine them in our minds. This is the much more abstract mental level. All right, so let's take a word. We'll take a word like, we can take a word like cat, okay? Because for some reason it always keeps coming back to cats and dogs, and maybe they seem very simple. So it's a place to start. All right, so we have the word. Let's take a word like, in fact, we'll take the word cat, okay? And we can take the word dog. And yeah, the vowel here, it might depend on which dialect of English. Like if you're maybe, you know, some dialects would be more like a dog. You get that open O sound, a dog. But here, Canadian English, as I'm speaking, this is going to be an ah here, or dog. Okay, so there's cat and dog. And, well, the only difference here now, we can add the extra detail here. And by the way, I'm using the IPA character picker app to get these symbols and paste them in. The link in the description. So here we see the allophone version, or the phone version. For dog, really nothing different. Cat has this detail that we have aspiration here. That instead of a regular K, it's like a K. So this is what you've already seen in phonetics. They talk about broad transcription and narrow transcription, right? And you see the same thing here, but now they're kind of explaining sort of what's going on behind it. And it's not, you know, when you look at this in phonetics, it's just a choice of, okay, how much detail do I want? How much detail do I want to include? Okay, so if I'm just doing like the broad details, the basics, then it's going to be broad transcription, slashes. But if I want to go into the weeds and into all the different little details of how these sounds are pronounced, that's where I go in to the narrow transcription. But the extension of this into phonology is the idea that in our minds, we don't need to think about every little detail. A lot of these details are automatic. And so we, in our minds, think about this sort of simplified basic version that is just enough. It's just all the information we need in order to tell all these words apart. And that's why they talk about phonemes being contrastive, because you can make contrast between different words by changing the phoneme. The little details, you don't change the word. If you were to pronounce this word cat and try to make, it a regular, you try to pronounce it, as like a regular K, and it's like cat, it would just sound like a funny way of saying cat. It wouldn't sound like a different word. But there are other languages where you would make a different word by changing the K, KH or K, because if that's a phoneme, you can make different words with it. But if it's not a phoneme, it's just like an extra detail that gets automatically added to the word. So you can really start to see this in action when you look at some different, let's add some more active phonology where like things are changing, things where more than just this. What if we say the word cats? Okay, so we're going to say cats. Let's get cats here, and we'll get dogs. And now, what comes out of our mouth? Okay, we say cats, so that's an S. But when we say dogs, what comes out of our mouth is a Z, or Z as some English speakers call it. And so this is a different sound. But the idea here is that in our mind, it's the same. And it's usually identified as being a Z. Although that does take a lot to get used to. Like, it's really hard to imagine that in our minds it's a Z, because we're so affected by looking at the spelling that, we think of the plural as being an S. The plural, like what's the letter that you make an S? Make a plural in English? Like that's an S. So we think of it as an S when we're thinking about the letters. But in our minds, the usual phonological analysis is that it's a Z. And because that's a way, when you make it Z as the default, it also, it makes the overall rules, the changes that have to happen to it, it makes the whole thing simpler to analyze if you make it a Z, even though that looks weird. But even if you said this was an S, like, it would still be the same principle. It doesn't, the point is that it's the same thing. In our minds, when we add a plural onto cat, or we add a plural onto dogs, it's exactly the same. And we don't think about this difference. And the difference between these two things is entirely predictable. So that's why they talk about these idea of being allophones. The word allo means other. It's like other sounds. The idea is that you have one phoneme, which is the Z here, but that phoneme here has two different ways, two different allophones, or ways that it can appear in the word. And so depending on which level you're looking at it, when you look at this last sound in the word cats, well, it could be an S or it could be a Z. If you're looking at the sound level, the allophone level, or the phoneme level. Whereas for dogs, it's a Z here at the allophone level, and it's a Z here at the phoneme level. So that can be confusing too, because the word allo means other. You think it has to be different, but there's always, every phoneme has at least one has one phone or one allophone that's exactly the same as the way we write the phoneme. So we basically pick out of all the allophones, all the different ways to say this single mental sound, the different ways it can come out of our mouth. We pick one to be sort of the representative to say, well, we'll call the phoneme that. So for here, it's for, we have KH and K, but we just call this phoneme K. I mean, you could make the phoneme the KH, and then you could have K, be considered different. Like, the point is that there's always going to be one phoneme here that covers all the different little details that can come out of your mouth. And so this, you can see how it takes a lot of getting used to whenever you're thinking about the sounds of a word, like to really think about like, are you thinking about it on the mental level or on the physical level? And it's going to be different in every language and even in different words. Like, here you see this S and Z, that they both correspond to this phoneme Z here. But you can see other examples, like if you had sip and zip, those are clearly different sounds, different words. And so you have sip, you have zip, different phonemes, and also different allophones here. It's only in the case here that you see them both, they're both a single thing in our mind that then gets this automatic change. So what really makes things like allophones is when there's some kind of an automatic process, and that's what we call phonological processes, or sometimes called phonological rules, where we see this automatic change between we only think about the level of detail that we need in order to identify these words, and then we have automatic processes happen to make the change. In this case, the process is that you match these two sounds that are next to each other. These two consonants that are together in a consonant cluster, and this is something you see across many, many languages, if not all languages that have these clusters. They like to have a certain similarity when the two consonants are together. So T is a voiceless sound made without vibrating your vocal cords, and S is as well. G is voiced, made with vibration in the vocal cords, and Z is as well. And it's very difficult to in a split second, start voicing and stop voicing in order to make these different. Like you're saying like cats or like dogs. It's hard to do that. It's much easier to say ts or gz. Either like you have them both be the voiceless sounds or both be the voice sounds. So whenever there's like a mismatch, like it would be the T and the Z, you would then change the Z. It loses its voicing, and of course Z, when you take away the vibration, z becomes s. It becomes an S. And that's how you get this automatic change. Whereas in these two words, already in our minds, we already think of them as different. We think sip and zip, we're saying a different sound here. We think about it and say, I want to say this word, so we say the S sound, or I want to say this word, so we say the Z sound. And that's how it comes out. But when we're saying cats and dogs, we're not thinking about the difference between the way that last sound comes out. And so that's something that takes some getting used to. I don't even feel like I fully explained it right now. Like the level of abstraction and the different things you kind of have to juggle to tell these concepts apart. It's not easy, but this is just one first look at it. So whenever you're looking at language sounds, of course, first step is don't think about the English letters. Of course, the writing system and the letters, that's a totally different story. And so in fact, that can just be distracting because you see S's or, whatever, but there's no S in dogs, right? So think about the phonetics, think about the phonetic spelling, but also ask yourself what level you're looking at. And you can look at the same words on both of these levels. Like they're both happening at the same time. And so it depends which one you want to look at. Are you going to look at the mental level of how we think about the sounds? Or are we going to look at, which is phonemes? Or are we going to look at the physical level, the sounds that are actually coming out of our mouth, going into our ears, and that's phones or allophones.